The Empire had conquered 17,000 worlds across 6 galaxies. Their warriors stood 12 feet tall with skin harder than diamond and muscles that could crush starship hulls. They breathed poison that killed most species instantly. Their eyes could see through solid matter, and their claws could tear through the strongest metals known to existence. For 10 million years, no civilization had ever defeated them in battle. They did not know the meaning of retreat. They did not understand surrender. They were the ultimate predators of the universe, and every species that had ever encountered them had either submitted or died. Commander stood on the bridge of the flagship Devastator, staring at the blue and green planet rotating slowly in the Earth. Such a small world, such a weak species living upon it. The humans had only achieved space travel a few centuries ago. They had not even colonized their own solar system properly. Their weapons were primitive. Their bodies were fragile. They were laughably short. By every measurement used to assess threat levels, humanity ranked at the very bottom. "Commander," said Lieutenant, approaching with a data tablet, "our scans are complete. The planet has approximately 9 billion inhabitants. Their military forces are scattered across multiple nations. They do not appear to have a unified defense system. Their most powerful weapons are nuclear devices, which our shields can easily withstand. Estimated time for complete planetary conquest is 3 standard rotations." Made a sound of contempt. 3 rotations seemed generous. He had conquered worlds with stronger defenses in a single rotation. The war fleet consisted of 500 warships, each carrying 10,000 warriors. 5 million of the deadliest soldiers in existence against a planet of soft, weak creatures who still fought among themselves over patches of dirt and imaginary lines on maps. "This will not even qualify as a battle," said. "It will be an extermination. The High Council wants this sector of space cleared for mining operations. These humans possess nothing of value except the minerals beneath their feet. We will remove them and harvest their world." The fleet moved into position around Earth, gave the order for the first wave of dropships to deploy. 100 vessels carrying 100,000 warriors descended toward the planet's surface. The locations had been carefully chosen: major population centers, military installations, centers of government. The way was simple: strike fast, strike hard, destroy all resistance before it could organize. It had worked on 17,000 worlds. It would work on Earth. The dropships entered the atmosphere, their hulls glowing red from friction. Inside, warriors prepared for combat. They checked their plasma rifles and sharpened their claws. Some performed ritual prayers to the god of war. Others simply waited in disciplined silence. Every warrior aboard had killed at least 1,000 enemies in their career. Some had killed millions. They did not feel fear. They did not feel doubt. They felt only the hungry anticipation of predators about to feed. The first dropship landed in a place the humans called New York City. It was midday, and the streets were crowded with humans going about their daily lives. The massive vessel crushed several buildings as it touched down, and the impact sent shockwaves through the surrounding blocks. Dust and debris filled the air. Car alarms screamed. People ran in every direction, screaming in terror. The boarding ramp lowered, and 500 warriors marched out in perfect formation. They expected to see the humans fleeing. They expected easy targets. What they did not expect was what actually happened. A human male, perhaps 30 years old, stood directly in their path. He was small by standards, barely 6 feet tall. He wore simple clothing, jeans, and a t-shirt. In his hand, he held nothing but a metal baseball bat. And he did not run. He did not scream. He looked at them with an expression they had never seen on any conquered species before. He looked angry. "Hey," the human shouted, "your ship just crushed my favorite pizza place." Before any warrior could react, the human charged. He moved faster than they had anticipated. The nearest warrior raised his plasma rifle, but the human was already inside his reach. The baseball bat swung in a powerful arc and connected with the warrior's head. The sound was like thunder. The warrior, a veteran of 300 campaigns, fell to the ground unconscious. Silence followed. Every present stared in disbelief. The warrior who had fallen was sub-commander, one of the most decorated soldiers in the fleet. His skull had been reinforced with metal plates after a battle wound centuries ago. And a human, a tiny, fragile human with a primitive metal stick, had knocked him down with a single blow. More humans emerged from the dust and debris. They came from buildings, from subway stations, from the rubble itself. They carried all manner of objects: baseball bats, lead pipes, kitchen knives, broken bottles. One large human carried what appeared to be an entire parking meter torn from the ground, and every single one of them wore that same expression, that same fury. "You picked the wrong city," said a woman, cracking her knuckles. "You picked the wrong planet." They opened fire with their plasma weapons. The shots were accurate. The shots were deadly. But the humans did not react the way conquered species were supposed to react. When the first human fell, the others did not flee. They screamed in rage and attacked with even greater fury. They threw themselves at the warriors with complete disregard for their own safety. They grabbed plasma rifles and turned them on their owners. They climbed onto warriors and attacked their eyes, their breathing tubes, any vulnerable point they could find. Within minutes, the 500 warriors who had landed in New York were engaged in the most desperate battle of their lives, and they were losing. Meanwhile, similar scenes played out across the planet. In Tokyo, a group of humans in business suits and school uniforms surrounded a landing party and attacked with umbrellas, briefcases, and their bare hands. In Moscow, humans emerged from buildings with vodka bottles filled with fire and threw them at the invaders. In Sydney, humans rode kangaroos into battle and used cricket bats as weapons. Humans attacked to the sound of loud music and coordinated their strikes like a violent dance. They had studied humanity before the invasion. They had analyzed human biology, human technology, human society, but they had missed something crucial. They had missed the most dangerous thing about humans. Humans did not know how to give up. Commander received the first reports with confusion. Casualties. From the initial landing, that was unprecedented. He ordered more detailed scans of the surface, and what he saw all logic. His warriors, the most feared soldiers in the universe, were being overwhelmed, not by superior technology, not by stronger fighters, but by sheer, relentless, unstoppable human aggression. A human grandmother had beaten a warrior unconscious with her handbag. A group of human children had tied up another warrior with jump ropes. A human in a wheelchair had rammed his chair into a warrior's legs and then beaten him with his own plasma rifle. Everywhere they had landed, humans were fighting back with anything and everything they could find. "This is impossible," said. "They are weak. Our scans confirmed their physical weakness." "Commander," said Lieutenant, his voice trembling, "I believe our scans measured the wrong qualities. We measured their physical strength compared to ours. We measured their technology compared to ours, but we did not measure their will. We did not measure their stubbornness. We did not measure their anger." Ordered the second wave to deploy. Another 100,000 warriors descended to the surface to reinforce the first wave. This time, they came prepared for resistance. They wore full combat armor. They carried heavier weapons. They deployed in formations. It made no difference. In a place called Texas, humans arrived on animals called horses, carrying ancient projectile weapons. They called themselves cowboys, and they fought like demons. Their bullets could not penetrate armor, but that did not stop them. They roped warriors with cables and dragged them behind their horses. They set traps in the desert sand. They fought in ways that no enemy had ever fought before, with creativity and adaptability that they could not predict. In a place called Florida, humans arrived on boats and in vehicles that traveled on water. They were old, these humans, with white hair and wrinkled skin, but their eyes burned with the same fury as the young. They had devices called golf clubs, and they swung them with surprising skill. One elderly human, who claimed to be 90 years old, single-handedly disabled a transport vehicle by hitting its engine with something called a driver. They began to take serious casualties. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Warriors who had never lost a battle were being dragged down by swarms of humans who refused to stop fighting even when wounded, even when dying. A human would lose an arm and continue attacking with the other. A human would be shot through the chest and use their last breath to bite a warrior's hand. It was madness. It was terrifying. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Commander made a decision that no commander had ever made in 10 million years of conquest. He ordered a tactical withdrawal of the ground forces. The warriors would return to the ships and regroup. They would bombard the planet from orbit and soften the defenses before attempting another landing. But the humans had other plans. As the dropships lifted off, humans clung to their hulls. They had somehow climbed onto the vessels during the fighting and refused to let go. They broke through maintenance hatches and crawled into the ships. They attacked the crews mid-flight. 3 dropships crashed because humans had somehow reached the cockpits and fought the pilots. 2 more were brought down by humans who had found the fuel lines and ignited them. On the flagship Devastator, Commander watched the disaster unfold with growing horror. His forces had been on Earth for less than 6 hours. In that time, he had lost 20,000 warriors, 20,000 of the finest soldiers in the universe, killed or captured by a species that had barely reached the stars. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They have no advanced weapons, their bodies are fragile, their numbers are smaller than ours. How are they winning?" No one could answer him. They had never needed to understand how an enemy could be more dangerous than their physical abilities suggested. They had never faced an enemy that would not stop fighting. They had never encountered a species that viewed invasion not as a military problem to be solved, but as a personal insult to be avenged. The humans were not fighting a war. They were fighting for their home, and that made all the difference. On the surface, the remaining forces had retreated to defensive positions around their landed ships. They formed perimeters and prepared to hold until reinforcements arrived. But the humans did not give them time to rest. Attacks came constantly, from every direction, at all hours. Humans snuck through the lines in darkness. They dug tunnels under the positions. They flew primitive aircraft overhead and dropped explosives. They drove vehicles into the perimeters and detonated them. And they kept talking. That was perhaps the strangest thing. The humans never stopped communicating. They shouted insults at They made jokes about the invasion. They played loud music and laughed even as they fought. One group of humans had somehow obtained a large speaker system and was broadcasting messages in broken language, taunting the warriors and challenging them to single combat. A warrior named accepted one such challenge. He stepped outside the perimeter to face a human who claimed to be a champion of his region. The human was small, with dark skin and a shaved head. He wore only shorts and small gloves on his hands, towered over him by 7 feet and outweighed him by several hundred pounds. The fight lasted 4 seconds. The human moved like water, flowing around massive fists and striking at joints and nerve clusters with surgical precision. He kicked the back of his knee, causing the warrior to stumble. He drove his fist into his throat, damaging his breathing tube. He grabbed his arm and twisted it at an angle that should have been impossible, applying leverage in ways that his strength tenfold. Fell, gasping and broken, defeated by a creature less than half his size. "That's called Brazilian," the human said, standing over his fallen opponent. "We've had thousands of years to figure out how to beat things bigger than us. Did you really think you were the first?" Word of defeat spread through the ranks like a plague. Warriors who had never known fear began to feel it for the first time. These humans were not like other species. They did not fight with simple strength or simple weapons. They fought with their minds. They adapted. They learned. They found weaknesses and exploited them. Commander received another report. The humans were communicating globally, sharing information about weaknesses. Within hours of the first contact, Humans on opposite sides of the planet knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. They had identified the weak points in armor, the vulnerabilities in their breathing systems, the frequencies that disrupted their communications. Information spread among them faster than they could adapt. They are a connected species, Lieutenant explained. Their global communication networks allow them to share knowledge instantly. Every weakness we reveal is immediately known to all of them. Every tactic that fails against them is never attempted again by any human anywhere. They are learning from our attacks in real time and adapting their defenses. This was unprecedented. Most species took generations to adapt to tactics. The humans were doing it in hours. On the surface of Earth, the tide was turning. Human military forces had finally organized and were joining the civilian resistance. They brought real weapons, tanks and aircraft and missiles. But more importantly, they brought training and discipline. The chaotic fury of the civilian resistance merged with military precision to create something truly terrifying. A defensive position in Europe was overrun by a combined force of human soldiers and civilians. The soldiers provided covering fire while civilians rushed the perimeter. They fell back, step by step, until they had nowhere left to retreat. When the position fell, not a single warrior remained standing. Similar defeats occurred across the planet. They were not merely losing, they were being systematically destroyed. Their technology meant nothing when humans could get close enough to fight hand to hand. Their superior physical abilities meant nothing when humans attacked in numbers too large to count. Their experience meant nothing when humans invented new tactics faster than they could learn them. Commander made another unprecedented decision. He ordered the fleet to begin orbital bombardment. If the warriors could not conquer Earth on the ground, they would simply destroy it from above. The humans would die, and the minerals could be extracted from the lifeless rock that remained. The first bombardment targets were selected: major cities, military installations, communication hubs. The weapons charged, ready to turn vast swaths of Earth's surface into molten glass. But the humans had anticipated this too. From hidden silos across the planet, missiles launched toward space. The humans called them nuclear weapons, primitive fusion devices that the shields could easily withstand. They did not bother to intercept them. They watched with contempt as the missiles rose toward the fleet. Then the missiles detonated, not against the ships, but in the space between them. The explosions released massive electromagnetic pulses that washed over the fleet. Shields could handle direct impacts, but they were not designed to filter electromagnetic radiation of such intensity. Systems flickered. Sensors went blind. Navigation computers crashed. In the confusion, other missiles arrived. These were not nuclear. They were kinetic impactors, simple masses of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. Without functioning sensors to track them, without computers to calculate interceptions, the ships had no defense. The impactors struck with devastating force, punching through hull armor and tearing through vital systems. 3 warships exploded in the first volley. 7 more were crippled. The fleet, which had entered Earth orbit with such confidence, was suddenly fighting for survival. Commander screamed orders at his crew. Full power to shields, restore systems, get us out of orbit. But the humans were not finished. As the ships struggled to restore their systems, more attacks came. These were smaller missiles, designed to evade rather than overpower. They slipped through gaps in the damaged shields and detonated against vulnerable sections of the ships. Each hit was small. Each hit was precise. Each hit struck exactly where it would cause the most damage. The humans were not fighting with brute force. They were fighting with intelligence. They had studied ship designs in the brief time since the invasion began and had already found the weaknesses. They knew where the reactors were located. They knew where the ammunition was stored. They knew where the life support systems were vulnerable. How was this possible? They had hidden their ship specifications carefully. No species had ever analyzed them so quickly. But the humans had. In a matter of hours, they had reverse-engineered enough information to turn the invasion fleet into target practice. The flagship Devastator took a hit to its main reactor. The ship shuddered as emergency systems engaged. Alarms blared. Crew members rushed to contain the damage. Commander felt something he had never felt in 1,000 years of command. He felt like prey. "Commander," said Lieutenant, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "We need to withdraw. The fleet is compromised. If we remain, we will be destroyed." Withdraw, the word burned in his mind. No fleet had ever withdrawn from a battle. No commander had ever retreated. To retreat was to admit weakness. To retreat was to dishonor the entire empire. But to stay was to die, and dead warriors could not conquer anyone. "All ships," said, forcing the words past his teeth. "Prepare for emergency jump. We are leaving this system." The remaining ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and fled. They left behind thousands of dead warriors, dozens of destroyed ships, and an invaded planet that had somehow become the invader's nightmare. As the fleet vanished into the darkness of space, took one last look at Earth on the. Such a small world, such a seemingly weak species, but the humans had taught them something that no other species had ever taught them. The universe was more dangerous than they had believed. On the surface of Earth, humans emerged from shelters and rubble to watch the retreating fleet. They had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had conquered 17,000 worlds, they had won. The celebrations began almost immediately. People danced in the streets. They hugged strangers. They laughed and cried and shouted at the sky. But even in celebration, the humans remained vigilant. They knew they would return. They knew this was only the first battle of a longer war, and they began preparing immediately. Factories that had been producing cars and electronics switched to producing weapons. Scientists who had been studying medicine and physics began studying technology captured from the battlefield. Soldiers who had fought in the defense began training others. They had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked Earth expecting to find an easy victory. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping for centuries. They had reminded humanity that the universe was hostile. They had given humans a reason to unite, a common enemy to fight, a purpose beyond their petty conflicts. And humans with a purpose were the most dangerous creatures in existence. In his chambers aboard the retreating flagship, Commander composed his report to the High Council. It would be the most difficult report of his career. He would have to explain how 5 million warriors had been defeated by a species that still used chemical propulsion rockets. He would have to describe battles where veterans had been beaten by humans with baseball bats. He would have to admit that the Empire had finally found something it could not conquer. He sat for a long time trying to find the words. In the end, he wrote simply, "We underestimated them. We must never make that mistake again. Earth is not to be invaded. It is to be avoided. The humans are not prey. They are something else. Something we have never encountered. Something that does not make sense by any standard we use to measure threat." He paused, then added one final line. "I recommend we classify Earth as a restricted zone. Any vessel that enters human space does so at its own risk. These creatures are not to be provoked. They are not to be challenged. They are to be left alone forever until the end of time." The report was sent. The fleet continued its retreat. And on Earth, humanity looked up at the stars with new eyes. They had learned something too. They had learned that they were not alone. They had learned that the universe held dangers they had never imagined. And they had learned something else, something more important. They had learned that they could win. The first interstellar war lasted 6 hours. It ended with the complete defeat of the invaders, and it marked the beginning of a new era in human history. An era where humanity would no longer wait for the universe to come to them. An era where they would go out to meet it, armed with the same fury and determination that had driven thee away. The cosmic warriors had fallen the moment they landed on Earth. They just had not realized it yet. But they would. In time, every species in the universe would learn what they had learned that day. Humans were not weak. Humans were not primitive. Humans were survivors. They were fighters. They were the children of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and they had won every single time. And they would continue winning, no matter what the universe threw at them, because that was what humans did. They fought. They adapted. They survived. And anyone who forgot that lesson would be reminded of it as painfully as necessary. The stars had been quiet since the dawn of human civilization. Now, the stars knew that humanity was coming, and the stars trembled. 7 years passed since the fleet fled from Earth. In that time, humanity transformed itself in ways that would have seemed impossible before the invasion. The nations of Earth, which had spent centuries fighting each other over territory and resources, united under a single governing body called the Earth Defense Coalition. Old rivalries were set aside. Old hatreds were forgotten. They had given humanity something it had never truly had before, a common enemy that threatened them all equally. The captured technology was studied, decoded, and improved. Human scientists, working in facilities built deep underground to protect against future attacks, unraveled the secrets of faster-than-light travel. They learned how to generate shields that could deflect plasma weapons. They discovered new materials stronger than anything Earth had ever produced. And they built ships, hundreds of ships, thousands of ships, a fleet that would make sure no alien force ever caught humanity unprepared again. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar battleship, the Unity. She was 43 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and scars on her hands from the Battle of Shanghai, where she had fought warriors with nothing but a broken pipe and her bare fists. Now, she commanded a vessel that could destroy cities from orbit and travel between stars in a matter of days. "Admiral," said her executive officer, Commander James Watson, "we've received the report from the Andromeda probe. That has been located. Coordinates are confirmed." Nodded slowly. For 7 years, humanity had been preparing for this moment. They had sent probes deep into space, following the trail of the retreating fleet. They had intercepted communications and decoded their language. They had built a picture of the Empire, its size, its strength, its structure, and they had made a decision. Humanity would not wait for them to return. Humanity would go to them. "Contact the fleet," ordered. "All ships prepare for jump. We're taking the fight to their doorstep." 300 human warships activated their FTL drives and vanished from Earth orbit. They reappeared at the edge of space, a region of the galaxy that had been under alien control for millions of years. Warning beacons detected their arrival and broadcast emergency signals to the nearest outposts. The Empire that had never known fear suddenly knew terror. The humans had come for them. On the Of Prime, High Emperor received the news with disbelief. Humans? In space? It was impossible. The quarantine of the human system had been absolute. No vessel had approached Earth since the disaster 7 years ago. How had the humans developed the technology to reach them? How had they built a fleet capable of threatening the Empire? "Your Eminence," said his chief advisor, Counselor, "our intelligence reports indicate that the humans have been building at an unprecedented rate. They have converted their entire industrial capacity to war production. They have drafted significant portions of their population into military service. They have done in 7 years what most species require centuries to accomplish." Struggled to comprehend this information. The Empire had existed for 10 million years. Its technology had been perfected over countless generations. Its military traditions were ancient and refined. How could a species that had only achieved space travel a few centuries ago possibly threaten them? "They are primitive," said. "They cannot possess weapons equal to ours. This must be some kind of bluff." "With respect, Your Eminence," said carefully, "we made similar assumptions before the invasion of Earth. Those assumptions proved fatal for many of our warriors." The High Emperor fell silent. He remembered Commander's report. He remembered the footage of soldiers being overwhelmed by humans armed with primitive weapons. He remembered the fear in his voice, a fear that no had ever expressed before. "What do you recommend?" asked. "We must negotiate," said. "We must discover what the humans want and find a way to satisfy them without direct conflict. If we engage them in war, we may win eventually, but the cost would be catastrophic. The humans have demonstrated that they will not surrender, no matter the odds. They will fight to the last individual. They will destroy everything they cannot defend. War with them would be a war of annihilation, and we might not survive it." Negotiation. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. The Empire did not negotiate. It conquered. It demanded. It took. But the humans had changed everything. They had broken the pattern that had existed for millions of years. "Very well," said. "Send a diplomatic vessel, discover what they want." The diplomatic ship approached the human fleet under a flag of truce. It was met by a shuttle carrying admiral and a small delegation. They gathered in the diplomatic vessel's conference chamber, aliens and humans facing each other across a table designed for negotiations that had never before been necessary. Studied the delegation with eyes that revealed nothing. She had fought these creatures in the streets of Shanghai. She had watched them kill her friends, her colleagues, her students. She had carried a wounded child through while plasma bolts burned the air around her. And now she sat across from their diplomats, discussing terms. "The human delegation has come to deliver a message," said, her voice flat and cold. "7 years ago, your forces invaded our world without provocation. You killed millions of our people. You destroyed our cities. You attempted to exterminate our species." The chief diplomat ambassador shifted uncomfortably. "The invasion was a military action. It was not personal. We sought resources, nothing more." "Everything is personal to humans," replied. "Every death, every destroyed home, every child who watched their parents die. You cannot separate actions from consequences in our minds. What you did to Earth will never be forgotten. It will never be forgiven." Swallowed nervously. "Then what do you want? Reparations? Territory? We are prepared to offer significant concessions." Leaned forward. "We want justice. We want the commanders who ordered the invasion of Earth to stand trial for their crimes. We want access to your technology, freely shared, without conditions. We want recognition of human sovereignty over a defined region of space. And we want a guarantee, written into the fundamental laws of your empire, that no vessel will ever approach human space again without explicit permission." "These demands are extreme," said. "The High Emperor cannot simply surrender our technology. He cannot subject our commanders to alien courts. He cannot." "He cannot afford to refuse," interrupted. "Look around you, Ambassador. Count the ships in my fleet. Then count the weapons on each ship. Then calculate how long it would take us to reach your empire has conquered 17,000 worlds, but you have never faced an enemy like us. We do not conquer. We do not negotiate from weakness. We come to you as equals, and we expect to be treated as such." The negotiations continued for days. The offered compromises, and the humans rejected them. The made threats, and the humans laughed at them. The tried to intimidate, and the humans responded with details of exactly how they would destroy every world if hostilities resumed. In the end, they had no choice but to accept the human demands. Commander, the officer who had led the failed invasion of Earth, was extradited to human custody along with 16 other high-ranking officers. They would face trial on Earth, in courts where their victims would testify against them. The technology archives were open to human scientists, who began studying them immediately. A border was established, defining human space and space, with neither side permitted to cross without permission. And humanity gained something else, something no species had ever obtained from the Empire: respect. Word of the negotiations spread across the galaxy. Species that had lived under oppression for millions of years learned that someone had finally stood up to the Empire. Someone had made the back down. Someone had demonstrated that the cosmic warriors were not invincible. Ambassador returned to Prime with the signed treaty and a warning for his emperor. "The humans are not like us," he said. "They do not think in generations or centuries. They think in years and decades. They adapt faster than we can imagine. They innovate faster than we can track. And they hold grudges forever. We made them our enemies, and they will never forget it. Our only hope is to honor this treaty perfectly, to give them no excuse to resume hostilities. Because if they come for us in force, I do not believe we can stop them." High Emperor accepted the treaty and issued orders for its enforcement, but he also ordered his military to begin secret preparations. The humans might be dangerous now, but they were still young. Given time, they could develop new weapons, new strategies, new approaches. They had survived for 10 million years by adapting to every threat. They would adapt to this one as well. What did not understand was that the humans were doing the same thing, and humans were much better at it. In the years following the treaty, human explorers spread across the galaxy. They made contact with dozens of species that had been conquered or threatened by the. They offered friendship, trade, and protection. They built alliances that they had never imagined possible. A species called the, who had lived under occupation for 3,000 years, welcomed human diplomats with celebrations that lasted for weeks. There were small, gentle creatures who had never understood violence, which had made them easy prey for the. But they possessed incredible technological knowledge, particularly in the fields of medicine and agriculture. They shared this knowledge with humanity, freely grateful for allies who did not demand submission. Another species, they were warriors who had fought the for without success. They were proud and honorable, and they had never surrendered, but they had been slowly losing ground for generations. When human ambassadors arrived, they were initially suspicious. Another powerful species come to conquer them. But the humans offered something unexpected. They offered to fight alongside the, not above them. They offered partnership, not domination. The first joint human military operation targeted a mining colony that had been built on what was traditionally territory. The operation was a complete success. Human tactical creativity combined with ferocity proved devastating. The garrison was overwhelmed in hours. The colony was liberated, and they gained something they had not felt in centuries: hope. Similar operations followed. The Empire, which had never faced coordinated resistance from multiple species, suddenly found itself fighting on dozens of fronts. Human advisors trained alien resistance fighters. Human engineers helped build weapons factories on liberated worlds. Human ships escorted refugee convoys and protected fragile trade routes. They responded with increasing desperation. They deployed more ships, more warriors, more resources. But every time they concentrated forces in one area, humans and their allies struck somewhere else. The empire was too large, its borders too long, its enemies too numerous. For the first time in 10 million years, they were losing territory. On Prime, High Emperor watched his empire crumble with growing rage. The humans had done this. The humans had transformed a galaxy of submissive species into a galaxy of enemies. They had taught the conquered peoples that resistance was possible. They had shown that they could be beaten. "Gather the fleet," ordered. "Every ship, every warrior. We will end this human threat once and for all. We will burn them to ash and scatter their survivors across the void. We will make an example of them that the galaxy will never forget." The largest military force in history assembled around Prime. 10,000 warships, carrying 50 million warriors. Weapons capable of destroying planets. Technology perfected over millions of years. It was an armada designed to conquer galaxies, focused on a single target: Earth. But the humans knew it was coming. Their intelligence networks had penetrated deep into society. Their probes had tracked ship movements for years, and they had been preparing their own response. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Unity once again, now leading a fleet of 500 human warships. It was smaller than the Armada by a factor of 20, By any conventional calculation, the humans should have been terrified, but only smiled. "They're bringing everything," she said. "Good. That means there will be nothing left to threaten us after we defeat them." "Admiral," said Commander Watson, "are you sure about this? The numbers are heavily against us." Turned to face her executive officer. "Commander, do you know why the lost on Earth 7 years ago? It wasn't because of our weapons. It wasn't because of our technology. It was because they thought war was about numbers and strength. They counted our soldiers and our ships and calculated that they would win. But war isn't mathematics. War is will. And humans have more will than any species in the galaxy." The Armada entered human space expecting to find a desperate defense. What they found was something entirely different. The human fleet did not attempt to block them or slow them down. Instead, it split into smaller groups and began a campaign of harassment that drove the commanders mad. Human ships would appear from nowhere, launch devastating strikes against supply vessels, and vanish before the main fleet could respond. Human mines, scattered across the approach route, crippled dozens of warships. Human electronic warfare disrupted communications and sensors, making coordination impossible. They pushed forward anyway, trusting in their numbers. They would absorb the losses. They would reach Earth. They would destroy the human and end this threat forever. But Earth was not the helpless target they expected. The planet had been fortified with defenses that made the invasion 7 years ago look like a minor skirmish. Thousands of weapons platforms orbited the world, each capable of destroying a warship. The surface bristled with launch facilities for missiles of every type. And the population, 9 billion humans who had spent 7 years preparing for this moment, waited with the same fury they had shown before. The Armada arrived at Earth and immediately came under attack from every direction. The orbital platforms opened fire with weapons that they had never seen before, developed in human laboratories using a combination of human innovation and stolen technology. The first wave of ships was destroyed in minutes. High Emperor, commanding the Armada from his flagship, ordered the fleet to concentrate its fire on the orbital platforms. Thousands of plasma bolts and missiles streaked toward the defenses. Many were intercepted. Many more struck their targets. The platforms began to fall. But as the orbital defenses weakened, the human fleet returned. Admiral had kept her ships at a distance, waiting for them to commit to the attack on Earth. Now she struck from behind, hitting the rear formations with everything she had. They were caught between the orbital defenses and the human fleet. They could not advance without being hit from behind. They could not retreat without abandoning their attack. They were trapped, exactly where the humans wanted them. The battle that followed was the largest space engagement in galactic history. Millions of missiles and energy bolts crisscrossed the void around Earth. Ships exploded in blinding flashes of light. Debris fields grew so thick that sensors became useless. Warriors on both sides fought with everything they had, knowing that this battle would decide the fate of their peoples. And slowly, inevitably, they began to lose. Their ships were powerful, but they were designed for conquest, not for desperate defense. Their warriors were fierce, but they were trained to attack, not to hold positions under pressure. Their technology was advanced, but it was old, perfected but static, unchanged for millions of years. The humans fought differently. They improvised. They adapted. They used tactics that no commander had ever seen, techniques developed in human military academies by officers who had studied every battle in human history and combined the lessons into something new. When a human ship was damaged, its crew did not abandon it. They used it as a weapon, ramming it into enemy vessels or setting it to self-destruct in the middle of formations. High Emperor watched his armada die around him. 10,000 ships reduced to 7,000, then 5,000, then 3,000. The greatest military force in history was being destroyed by creatures that had barely achieved space travel when the war began. "Your Eminence," said his fleet commander, "we must withdraw. The battle is lost." Withdraw, snarled. To where? We brought everything. There is nothing to withdraw to. If we lose here, the Empire falls. Then we must negotiate, the commander said. We must surrender. Surrender. The word struck like a physical blow. No emperor had ever surrendered. The very concept was alien to their culture. To surrender was to admit inferiority. To surrender was to accept death as a species. But what choice did he have? A communication channel opened. Admiral's face appeared on the. She looked tired, her uniform stained with smoke and sweat from the battle, but her eyes were as cold and hard as they had been during the negotiations years before. Emperor, she said, your fleet is defeated. Your warriors are dying. You have two choices. Surrender now and submit to human judgment, or continue fighting and be destroyed completely. There will be no third option. There will be no further negotiations. Stared at the human with hatred that burned in his soul. She was small, fragile, mortal. She should have been nothing. Her species should have been nothing. But somehow they had done what no other species had ever done. They had brought the Empire to its knees. I will not surrender to vermin, said. Nodded as if she had expected this response. Then you will die, and your empire will die with you. And in 1,000 years, when the historians write about this war, they will say that they were destroyed because their emperor was too proud to admit defeat. Your legacy will be failure and extinction. Is that what you want? His hand trembled over the communication controls. He could end this. He could give the order to fight to the death. But what would that accomplish? His warriors would die, his ships would be destroyed, and the humans would win anyway. He thought of his ancestors, the warriors who had built the empire over millions of years. He thought of the future that would never exist if he chose pride over survival. He thought of his children, and who would be hunted and destroyed if the empire fell completely. What are your terms? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Told him the terms were harsh. The military would be dismantled. Their empire would be divided among the species they had conquered. The High Emperor and his council would stand trial for crimes against sentient life. The people would survive, but they would never again be conquerors. Listen to every word. When finished, he closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his life. I accept. The Battle of Earth ended with the complete defeat of the Armada. 8,000 warships destroyed. 30 million warriors killed. The greatest military force in galactic history reduced to wreckage floating in the void around a small blue planet. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for months. Humans who had lived under the shadow of alien threat finally felt safe. They danced in the streets. They embraced strangers. They looked up at the stars and saw possibility instead of danger. But Admiral did not celebrate. She stood on the bridge of the Unity, watching the cleanup operations proceed. Damaged ships were being towed to orbital repair facilities. Debris was being collected and recycled. Prisoners were being transported to holding facilities. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. Admiral, said Commander Watson, approaching with a data pad. The reconstruction plans are ready for your review. They have offered medical assistance for our wounded. They want to hold a joint victory parade on there, and there are 17 diplomatic delegations waiting to speak with you. Took the data pad and looked at the long list of items requiring her attention. Commander, do you know what this greatest mistake was? Watson shook his head, pride underestimating us. No, said. Their greatest mistake was thinking that war was the only way to deal with other species. They saw the galaxy as a place of competition and conquest. They never imagined that cooperation could be stronger than domination. She gestured at the view screen, where allied ships from a dozen species were working alongside human vessels. Look at what we've built. Humans and dozens of others all working together. They spent 10 million years trying to unite the galaxy through force. We've done it in less than a decade through friendship. The trials of the leadership took place on Earth, in courts designed specifically for the purpose. High Emperor and his council faced charges that spanned millions of years: genocide, slavery, destruction of entire civilizations. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony of survivors filled thousands of hours of recordings. In the end, the verdicts were unanimous: guilty on all counts. The punishments varied. Some faced execution, others faced life imprisonment, still others faced exile to barren worlds where they could cause no further harm. The Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for 10 million years, was finally held accountable for its crimes. But humanity did not stop there. They helped rebuild the worlds that had devastated. They shared technology freely with species that had been progress for. They established trade networks that brought prosperity to regions that had known only exploitation. And they created a new galactic government, a federation of equal species working together for the common good. Admiral retired from military service and became humanity's first ambassador to this new federation. She traveled to hundreds of worlds, meeting with species she had never imagined existed. She learned about cultures and histories that spanned millions of years, and she worked to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. In her final address to the Federation Council, she spoke words that would be remembered for generations. They believed that the strong should rule the weak. They believed that power was the only measure of worth. They were wrong. True strength is not in conquest but in cooperation. True power is not in domination but in liberation. We are all different, we species of this galaxy. We have different bodies, different minds, different ways of seeing the universe, but we share one thing in common. We are all alive. We all want to survive. We all want to prosper. And together we can achieve things that none of us could achieve alone. The Federation flourished. Species that had been enemies learned to work together. Technologies were shared, improving the lives of countless beings. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. The galaxy, which had been divided by fear and hatred for so long, finally found a path toward peace. And at the center of it all were the humans, the small, fragile creatures from a small, blue planet, the species that had been dismissed as primitive and weak, the species that had taught the galaxy what true strength really meant. The cosmic warriors had fallen the moment they landed on Earth, but in their fall they had given humanity something priceless. They had given humans a purpose, a reason to reach for the stars, a cause worth fighting for. And humanity would never forget it. 300 years had passed since humanity first encountered the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Where once there had been an empire built on conquest and fear, there now existed a federation of thousands of species living in peace and cooperation. Trade routes connected worlds across multiple galaxies. Scientific discoveries came faster than ever before as different species shared knowledge freely. Diseases that had plagued civilizations were cured. Poverty and starvation became memories of a darker age. The galaxy had entered a golden era, and humanity stood at its heart. Dr. Torres was 120 years old, though medical advances had kept her body in the condition of a healthy 50-year-old. She was the director of the Galactic Historical Archive, the largest collection of information in known space. Her job was to preserve the past so that future generations could learn from it. And today, she was about to witness something she had never expected. A message had arrived from the outer reaches, the distant regions of space where the remnants of the people lived in quiet exile. The message was simple. An elder wished to visit Earth. He wanted to see the world that had destroyed his empire. He wanted to understand what had happened and why. The request was unprecedented. No had visited Earth since the surrender 3 centuries ago. The wounds were still too fresh for many humans, even after all this time. But the Federation Council had approved the visit, believing it might help heal the last remaining divisions in galactic society. Was assigned to guide the visitor. She waited at the landing platform as the shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere. Around her, security officers stood ready, their weapons hidden but accessible. The human government had assured everyone that the visit was peaceful, but old fears died hard. The shuttle landed and a ramp descended. A single figure emerged. He was old, this. His skin, once hard as diamond, had faded to dull gray. His muscles, once capable of crushing steel, had withered with age. He moved slowly, carefully, as if every step required conscious effort. But his eyes, those predator's eyes that had once seen through solid matter, still burned with intelligence. "Welcome to Earth," said, stepping forward. "I am Dr. Tors. I will be your guide during your visit." The studied her for a long moment. "I am," he said. "I was the commander of the fleet that invaded your world 300 years ago." Felt a chill run through her. The name was legend. He was the monster who had ordered the first attacks. He was the demon who had killed millions. He was the reason humanity had learned to fear the stars. And now he stood before her, old and feeble, asking for nothing but the chance to see what he had once tried to destroy. "I know who you are," said, keeping her voice steady. "I've studied your campaigns, your tactics, your decisions. I've spent my career trying to understand what drove your people to conquer so much of the galaxy." Nodded slowly. "And have you reached any conclusions?" "Some," said, "but I suspect you could teach me more than any archive." They walked together through the streets of New Geneva, the capital city that had been built after the original Geneva was destroyed in the invasion. Around them, humans and aliens went about their daily business. Children played in parks. Artists performed on street corners. The air was clean, the sky was blue, and the world hummed with the energy of a civilization at peace. Watched everything with ancient eyes. "It is beautiful," he said quietly, "more beautiful than I expected." "Did you think we would let the destruction define us?" asked. "I did not think about it at all," admitted. "When I ordered the invasion, humans were nothing to me. Numbers on a screen, resources to be harvested. I did not consider that you might have hopes or dreams or lives worth living. That was my first mistake." They visited the memorial to the fallen, a vast structure that contained the names of every human who had died in the invasion and the war that followed. The list went on for kilometers, name after name carved into walls of polished stone. Read some of them, sounding out the unfamiliar syllables under his breath. "Each of these names was a person," said. "Each had a family who loved them. Each had a future that was stolen. When you ordered the invasion, you ended all of those futures. Can you understand what that means?" Was silent for a long time. "I understand now," he said finally. "I did not understand then. My people believed that strength was everything. We believed that the weak existed only to serve the strong. We never considered that weakness and strength might be measured in different ways. Your people taught us that lesson. You taught me that lesson." "At a terrible cost." "Yes, at a terrible cost." They continued their tour, showed the Museum of Human Resilience, which documented humanity's response to the invasion. The exhibits included captured weapons, recordings of the battles, testimony from survivors. One room contained the remains of the first warrior killed in the invasion, the one who had been knocked unconscious by a human with a baseball bat. The baseball bat itself was displayed beside the body, a simple metal tool that had changed the course of galactic history. Stared at the exhibit for a long time. "I knew this warrior," he said. He was one of the finest soldiers in the fleet, 300 campaigns without a single defeat, and he was brought down by a human with a stick." "Do you know what happened to that human?" asked. "The one with the baseball bat." Shook his head. "His name was Michael. He was a construction worker. He had no military training, no combat experience. He just saw his city being invaded and decided to fight back. After the battle, he became a symbol of human resistance. He traveled the world, encouraging others to stand up against the. When the war ended, he became a diplomat. He spent the rest of his life working to build peace between species. He died 40 years ago, surrounded by his children, and he was called the father of human resistance." "A construction worker," said softly. We were defeated by construction workers and office clerks and elderly people with sports equipment. We never understood how that was possible. Because you measured strength only in physical terms, said. You looked at our bodies and saw weakness. You looked at our technology and saw primitiveness. But you never looked at our spirits. You never understood that humans would rather die fighting than live as slaves. You never grasped that every single one of us, from the smallest child to the oldest grandparent, would throw ourselves against your warriors if it meant protecting our home. Nodded slowly. The conquered 17,000 worlds before Earth. None of them fought like you did. They all calculated the odds, saw that they could not win, and surrendered. They thought survival was more important than freedom. Your people thought differently. Because we learned long ago that survival without freedom is not really living, said. Our history is filled with stories of people who gave everything to resist tyranny. We celebrate those stories. We teach them to our children. We make heroes of those who stand against overwhelming odds. It is part of who we are. They walked on, passing through districts that showcased humanity's achievements since the war. Research facilities where scientists from 100 species worked together, universities that welcomed students from across the galaxy, medical centers that offered healing regardless of species or ability to pay. The Earth that had tried to destroy had become the heart of a civilization greater than anything his people had ever built. Do you regret it? Asked. The invasion. Considered the question carefully. I regret the deaths. I regret the suffering. I regret the arrogance that led me to believe I had the right to decide the fate of your species, but I do not regret the consequences. My invasion, terrible as it was, led to this. He gestured at the world around them. Your people united. The galaxy transformed. Perhaps some good came from my evil. That's a convenient way to justify your actions. I do not seek to justify them, said. I know what I did was wrong. I have spent 300 years in exile, thinking about the lives I ended and the families I destroyed. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I simply wanted to see, before I die, what my victims built from the ashes I left behind. Studied the old warrior. He looked so fragile now, so different from the monster she had read about in archives. 3 centuries of age and regret had worn him down. The predator had become the penitent. Would you like to meet some of them? She asked. The survivors of your invasion, some are still alive. Hesitated, fear crossed his ancient features. Would they want to meet me? Some might. Some might want to look you in the eye and tell you what you took from them. Others might want to show you that they survived despite everything you did. A few might even want to forgive you, though I cannot promise that. I do not deserve their forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about deserving. It is about releasing the past so that you can move forward. Some of them might need that release as much as you do. The meetings were arranged. Over the following days, met with survivors of the invasion he had ordered. Each meeting was different. Some survivors screamed at him, releasing 3 centuries of bottled rage. Others wept and asked him questions he could not answer. A few simply looked at him in silence, trying to reconcile the monster of their nightmares with the fragile old creature before them. One meeting stood out from all the others. Maria Santos was 97 years old. She had been a child during the invasion, hiding in a basement with her family while warriors burned her neighborhood. Her parents had been killed. Her brother had been killed. She had survived only because her grandmother had hidden her in a storage cabinet and sacrificed herself to draw the warriors away. When entered her room, Maria was sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the city that had risen from the ruins. She turned to face him, and for a long moment neither spoke. I used to hate you, Maria said finally. For years after the invasion, I dreamed about killing you. I imagined finding you somehow and making you pay for what you did to my family. That hatred kept me going when nothing else could. I understand, said. No, you don't, Maria said. You don't understand what it's like to be a child hiding in a cabinet, listening to your grandmother die. You don't understand what it's like to grow up with no parents, no brother, no home. You don't understand what it's like to carry that pain for 9 decades and know that the creature who caused it is still alive somewhere." Said nothing. What could he say? "But I'm tired," Maria continued. "I'm tired of hatting. I'm tired of carrying that weight. I'm tired of letting you control my life even after all these years." She stood slowly and walked toward him. "So I'm going to do something I never thought I would do. I'm going to forgive you." His eyes widened. "Why?" "Not for your sake," Maria said. "For mine. Because holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Because my grandmother didn't hide me in that cabinet so I could spend my life as a prisoner of your crimes. Because I want to be free, truly free, and that means letting go of you." She reached out and took his clawed hand in her small, weathered fingers. "I forgive you. I forgive you for my parents, for my brother, for my grandmother, for everything. I release you and I release myself. Go in peace." Commander of the fleet that had tried to exterminate humanity wept. The tears fell from his ancient eyes and streaked down his faded skin. He had lived for thousands of years. He had conquered worlds and destroyed civilizations. But in all that time, no one had ever shown him such mercy. "Thank you," he whispered, "thank you." The visit continued for several more weeks, traveled across Earth, seeing the world he had once tried to destroy. He walked through forests that had from burned wastelands. He visited cities that had risen from ruins. He met humans who worked, played, loved, and lived in ways he had never imagined possible. And slowly, his understanding deepened. They had believed that strength came from domination. They had built an empire on the principle that the powerful should rule the weak. But the humans had built something different. They had built a civilization based on cooperation, compassion, and the belief that every life had value. And their civilization had proven stronger than the empire had ever been. On his final day on Earth, asked to visit one more place. The site where the first dropship had landed 300 years ago. The spot where Michael had swung his baseball bat and changed the course of history. The site was now a park. Green grass covered the ground where warriors had once marched. Children played on structures built in the shape of starships. A statue stood at the center, frozen in the moment of his famous swing, facing down an enemy 100 times his size. Stood before the statue for a long time. "I have learned something," he said finally. "Something my people never understood. True strength is not about power or conquest. True strength is about standing for something greater than yourself. He had no chance of defeating my warrior. By every calculation, he should have run or hidden or surrendered. But he didn't. He stood and fought, knowing he would probably die because he believed his world was worth defending. That is strength. That is what we could never conquer." Stood beside him. "Will you take this lesson back to your people?" "Yes," said, "if they will listen. They are few now, scattered across distant worlds. Many still cling to the old ways, believing that someday we will rise again and reclaim our empire. But others are beginning to question. They are beginning to wonder if there might be a better path. Perhaps my testimony will help them choose that path." "I hope so." Turned to face directly. "I want to thank you, Dr. Torres. You could have treated me as an enemy. You could have shown me only hatred and condemnation. Instead, you showed me your world with honesty and grace. You helped me understand what I was too blind to see 300 years ago." "Understanding is the first step toward healing," said, "for both of us." The shuttle lifted off, carrying back to the outer reaches. Watched until it vanished among the stars, then turned back to look at the city spread out before her. 300 years ago, this place had been a battlefield. Now it was a symbol of everything humanity had achieved. She thought about the journey her species had taken. From a small blue planet, barely capable of reaching its own moon, to the center of a galactic civilization. From isolated nations fighting over scraps of territory to a united people reaching for the stars. From prey to partners. They had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. They had found something else entirely. They had found a species that would not be broken, a species that fought back against impossible odds, a species that turned defeat into victory and tragedy into triumph. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. Returned to her office at the historical archive. On her desk was a display showing messages from across the galaxy. Representatives from countless species wanted to share their histories, their stories, their memories. They wanted to be part of the great record that was building, the story of how the galaxy went from division to unity. She began to work through the messages, one by one. A historian wanted to contribute records of their people's liberation. A warrior wanted to share tales of the battles fought alongside human soldiers. A young scholar, barely out of childhood, wanted to learn about the species that had defeated his ancestors. Approve them all. The archive would grow, the story would expand, and future generations from every corner of the galaxy would learn the lesson that humanity had taught. That true strength comes not from domination but from determination. That true power comes not from conquest but from cooperation. That a species willing to fight for its freedom can change the course of history. The stars no longer trembled at the thought of human expansion. Instead, they welcomed humanity as partners and friends. The fear that had once defined galactic society had been replaced by hope, and all of it could be traced back to a single moment, 300 years ago, when a construction worker with a baseball bat decided that his world was worth defending. The cosmic warriors had fallen the moment they landed on Earth, not because humans were stronger or more advanced or better equipped, but because humans refused to give up. Because humans believed that some things were worth fighting for. Because humans, alone among all the species they had encountered, had the courage to stand against the darkness. And that courage had lit a fire that would never go out. In that followed, humanity spread across the galaxies. They explored regions of space that no species had ever visited. They made discoveries that transformed the understanding of physics, biology, and the nature of existence itself. They encountered new species, some friendly and some hostile, and found ways to work with all of them. But they never forgot their origins. They never forgot the moment when they had faced annihilation and chosen to fight. They never forgot the construction workers and office clerks and elderly grandparents who had stood against an empire and won. Every human child learned the story. Every human colony celebrated the anniversary of the first landing. Every human ship carried a symbol of that moment, a simple baseball bat mounted in a place of honor. Because the story was not just about the past, it was about the future. It was a reminder that no matter how powerful an enemy might seem, no matter how impossible the odds might appear, the human spirit could not be conquered. As long as one human was willing to stand and fight, hope survived. They had learned this lesson at the cost of their empire. Other species had learned it through partnership and friendship. And humanity had learned it about themselves, discovering depths of courage and resilience they had never known they possessed. The universe was vast and full of wonders. It was also full of dangers, threats that even humanity might not survive. But the lesson of the first landing gave humans the confidence to face whatever came. They had been tested once, against an enemy that should have destroyed them, and they had prevailed. They would prevail again, no matter what the universe threw at them, because that was what humans did. They stood, they fought, they won. And the stars, which had once belonged to conquerors and tyrants, now belonged to everyone. The cosmic warriors had fallen, and from their fall, a new era had begun. An era of peace, prosperity, and infinite possibility. An era that would last not for centuries but for as long as sentient life existed in the universe. All because of one small planet, one stubborn species, one man with a baseball bat. The story ended there, but the future was just beginning.